The blizzard descended upon the Montana territory with such ferocious speed that Sarah Mitchell barely had time to register the danger before the world turned into a wall of blinding white. She had been traveling from Fort Benton to her uncle's ranch near Great Falls in December of 1882, accompanied only by a hired driver who now lay motionless in the overturned stagecoach behind her, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle from the impact when the horses had bolted in panic. Sarah was 22 years old, a schoolteacher from Boston who had journeyed west to start a new life after her father's shipping business collapsed, leaving her family destitute and her prospects for marriage in proper society shattered. Now, as she stumbled away from the wreckage with frozen tears on her cheeks and the wind howling like 1,000 demons, she realized that her decision to come west might cost her everything. The cold cut through her wool traveling dress and heavy coat as though they were made of paper. Sarah could barely see her own hands in front of her face, and the snow stung her exposed skin like tiny needles. She tried to retrace her steps back to the stagecoach, thinking she might find shelter there until the storm passed, but after only a few moments she realized with horror that she had completely lost her bearings. Every direction looked the same, just endless swirling white, and the wind was so loud that she could not hear anything else. Panic seized her chest, making it even harder to breathe in the thin, icy air. "Help!" she screamed, but the wind tore the word from her mouth and scattered it across the frozen plains. "Somebody help me!" Sarah forced herself to keep moving because she knew that stopping meant death. Her father had read her accounts of trappers and explorers who had frozen to death in winter storms, and she remembered how they described the dangerous temptation to simply lie down and sleep. She wrapped her arms around herself and pushed forward, though she had no idea if she was walking towards safety or deeper into the wilderness. The cold was becoming unbearable, seeping into her bones and making her movements sluggish. Her fingers and toes had gone numb, and she could no longer feel her face. Time lost all meaning in the whiteout. Sarah might have been walking for minutes or hours. She fell twice, her skirts tangling around her legs, and the second time she struggled to find the strength to stand again. "This is how I die," she thought with strange clarity. "Frozen in Montana, alone, and no one will ever know what happened to me." Her mother back in Boston would wait for letters that would never come, and eventually she would assume the worst. The thought of her mother's grief gave Sarah enough strength to push herself upright one more time. That was when she heard it, faint but unmistakable, cutting through the howl of the wind. "Hello, can you hear me? Call out if you can hear me." A man's voice, deep and strong, coming from somewhere in the white chaos. Sarah tried to shout back, but her voice came out as barely more than a hoarse whisper. She swallowed hard, tasting blood where her lips had cracked, and tried again. "Here! I am here! Please help me!" "Keep talking," the voice commanded. "I will find you, but you have to keep making noise. Do not stop." Sarah began to shout anything that came to mind, reciting poetry she had taught her students, singing hymns from church, calling out her name and where she was from. Her throat burned and her lungs ached, but she kept going because that voice was her only hope. She heard him calling back to her, telling her to stay where she was, that he was coming, and the sound grew gradually louder. Then suddenly he was there. Materializing out of the storm like an apparition, he was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat that was completely covered in snow. A thick scarf covered the lower half of his face, and frost clung to his eyebrows and the dark hair that stuck out from under his hat. He grabbed her arm with a gloved hand, his grip firm and steady. "I have got you," he said, his voice muffled by the scarf but filled with authority. "Are you hurt? Can you walk?" "I think so," Sarah managed to say through chattering teeth. "The stagecoach overturned. The driver is dead." The man nodded grimly. "I saw the wreckage. We cannot stay here. My horse is nearby, but we need to get to shelter fast. This storm is only going to get worse." "I cannot see anything," Sarah said, and she hated how small and frightened her voice sounded. "How can you possibly know where to go?" The cowboy pulled her closer, tucking her against his side to shield her from the worst of the wind. I have lived in this country for 10 years. I know every inch of this land, storm or no storm. But you are going to have to trust me completely, follow my voice and trust me. Can you do that?" Sarah looked up at him, or at least at the vague shape of him in the blinding snow, and made a decision that she would later recognize as the most important of her life. "Yes, I trust you." "Good, now stay close. We are going to walk together. And I need you to keep one hand on my coat at all times. If we get separated in this whiteout, I might not be able to find you again." Sarah grabbed onto his coat with both hands, her frozen fingers struggling to maintain their grip on the thick fabric. The cowboy started walking, moving with surprising confidence despite the fact that visibility was virtually zero. He kept talking to her as they went, his voice steady and calm, telling her they were doing well, that it was not much farther, that she was brave for holding on. "What is your name?" he asked at one point. "Sarah Mitchell," she answered, shouting to be heard over the wind. "I am Cole Brennan. I run cattle on a ranch about 2 miles from here. We are heading to a line shack I built last year. It is small, but it has a stove and firewood. We will be safe there until the storm passes. 2 miles might as well have been 200 in these conditions." Every step was a battle, and Sarah's legs felt like lead weights. She stumbled repeatedly, but each time Cole was there, his strong arm catching her and keeping her upright. He never showed impatience or frustration, just kept encouraging her, kept telling her she could make it, that they were almost there. Sarah had no idea how he could possibly know where he was going. The world was nothing but white noise and white landscape, no landmarks visible, no sun to navigate by. Yet Cole moved with the certainty of a man following a well-worn path, adjusting their direction slightly every so often, always keeping them moving forward. "How can you tell where we are?" she gasped, during a moment when the wind died down slightly. "The wind," Cole replied. "It blows from the northwest in storms like this. I'm keeping it at a certain angle to my back. Also, the land slopes very gently upward as we head toward the line shack. You might not be able to feel it, but I can. And I am counting my steps. I know exactly how many paces it takes to get there from where I found you." Sarah was amazed by his skill and knowledge, but she was too exhausted to say so. She focused all her energy on simply putting one foot in front of the other and maintaining her grip on Cole's coat. Her entire world had narrowed to those two things and the sound of his voice. Just when Sarah thought she could not take another step, Cole stopped. "Here," he said, "the shack is right in front of us." Sarah saw nothing but snow, but then Cole moved forward and she felt him reach out and push something. A door scraped open, and suddenly they were stumbling into a dark interior that, while still cold, was blessedly free from the cutting wind. Cole guided Sarah to sit on what felt like a wooden bench. Then she heard him moving around in the darkness. "Stay there," he instructed. "I need to get the stove going before we do anything else." Sarah heard scraping sounds, then saw the blessed flare of a match. Cole lit a small oil lamp that cast a warm golden glow over the interior of the shack. It was indeed tiny, barely 12 feet square, with a pot-bellied stove in one corner, a narrow cot against one wall, and a few shelves holding supplies. Cole worked quickly, feeding kindling into the stove and coaxing the fire to life. Soon flames were crackling, and warmth began to spread through the small space. Once the fire was established, Cole finally turned his attention to Sarah. He unwound the scarf from his face, revealing strong, weathered features, a straight nose, and a firm jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. His eyes were a striking gray blue, the color of storm clouds, and they studied her with concern. "Let me see your hands," he said gently. Sarah tried to remove her gloves, but her fingers would not cooperate. Cole helped her, carefully peeling off the wet gloves and examining her hands with a frown. Her fingers were white and waxy looking. "Frostbite," he said grimly. "Not too severe yet, but we need to warm you up slowly. Too fast, and it will cause more damage." He moved to the shelves and pulled down a tin cup and a small pot. I'm going to make you something warm to drink, and we need to get you out of those wet clothes. Sarah felt her face flush despite the cold. I cannot possibly. You will die if you stay in wet clothes, Cole said bluntly, but not unkindly. I have spare things you can wear. I will turn my back while you change, but this is not negotiable, Miss Mitchell. Your life depends on it. He was right, of course. Sarah could feel the wet fabric of her dress clinging to her skin, sucking away what little warmth she had left. Cole retrieved a bundle of clothing from a wooden chest, handing her a thick wool shirt, long underwear, and heavy socks, then deliberately turned to face the wall. Tell me when you're decent, he said. With shaking hands, Sarah struggled out of her wet traveling dress, corset, and undergarments. Everything was soaked through, and she realized with dismay that she had been even closer to death than she had thought. She pulled on Cole's clothes, which were far too large but wonderfully warm and dry. The shirt hung past her knees like a dress, and she had to roll up the sleeves several times. The socks came up past her knees. You can turn around, she said softly. Cole turned, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, an expression she could not quite read, before his face settled back into professional concern. He brought her the cup, now filled with hot coffee that he had somehow prepared in those few minutes. Drink this slowly, he instructed. Too fast, and you will make yourself sick. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup and took small sips of the bitter, wonderful coffee. As feeling began to return to her extremities, pain came with it, a burning, prickling sensation that made her gasp. I know it hurts, Cole said, settling onto the floor near the stove, but that is actually a good sign. It means you are thawing out. The worst cases do not hurt because the tissue is already dead. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind shrieked and howled, battering the small shack, but the walls held firm, and the stove kept burning. Sarah studied Cole when she thought he was not looking, taking in the details she had missed in her initial panic. He looked to be in his early 30s, with the lean, tough build of someone who spent their life doing hard physical labor. His hands, now wrapped around his own cup of coffee, were scarred and calloused. There was a quiet competence to everything he did, an economy of movement that spoke of someone who did not waste time or energy. Thank you, Sarah said finally. You saved my life. If you had not found me... Best not to think about that, Cole interrupted gently. What matters is that I did find you. What were you doing out in this weather? The stage from Fort Benton should have arrived yesterday. We were delayed leaving Fort Benton, Sarah explained. The driver said we could make it to the next station before the storm hit. Obviously, he was wrong. Harrison was always too confident for his own goods, Cole said, and Sarah realized he must have known the driver. I am sorry you had to see him die. It happened so fast. The horses panicked, and then we were tumbling, and then everything was still, and he was just lying there. Sarah's voice broke. I tried to help him, but there was nothing I could do. You did what you could. Now you need to focus on staying alive yourself. Cole stood and checked the stove, adding more wood. This storm could last hours or even days. We have enough supplies here to wait it out, but it is going to be tight quarters. I do not mind, Sarah said quickly. After being out in that storm, this feels like a palace. A small smile tugged at Cole's lips. You must have come from back east to say something like that. Nobody who grew up out here would call a 12-by-12 shack a palace. Boston, Sarah confirmed. I am a school teacher. I was on my way to my uncle's ranch near Great Falls. He hired me to teach his children. Thomas Mitchell? Cole asked with surprise. He is your uncle? You know him? Everyone around here knows Thomas Mitchell. He runs one of the biggest cattle operations in the territory. Good man, fair dealer? Cole's expression softened. He is going to be worried sick when that stage does not arrive. There is no way to let him know I am safe, is there? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Not until the storm clears and we can make it back to civilization. But your uncle knows this country. He will know that anyone with sense would hole up and wait it out. He will not expect you to try to travel in this." The storm continued its assault on the shack throughout the evening. Cole proved to be an excellent provider even in their limited circumstances, heating up beans and salt pork from his supplies and serving it with hardtack that he softened in the bean juice. It was simple food, but to Sarah it tasted like the finest meal she had ever eaten. As night fell, the temperature inside the shack dropped despite the stove's best efforts. Cole gave Sarah the cot and spread his bedroll on the floor near the stove, insisting she needed the better sleeping arrangement to help her body recover from the exposure. "I cannot take your bed," Sarah protested. "You can and you will," Cole replied firmly. "I have slept on worse than this floor, trust me. Besides, I need to tend the stove through the night to keep the fire going." Sarah was too exhausted to argue further. She lay down on the cot, wrapped in several thick blankets Cole had provided, and watched him settle onto his bedroll. The lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the wind continued to howl outside, but inside the small shack, Sarah felt safe for the first time since the stagecoach had overturned. "Cole?" she said softly into the darkness. "Yes?" "How did you happen to be out in the storm? How did you find me?" There was a long pause. "I was riding the fence line when I saw the storm coming in fast. I was heading to this shack to wait it out when I heard the stagecoach horses. They had broken free and were running wild. I knew something was wrong, so I followed their tracks back as far as I could before the snow covered them. Found the overturned coach and saw your tracks leading away from it. I knew whoever made them could not have gone far, so I started searching." "You risked your life for a stranger." "Could not exactly leave you to freeze, could I?" Cole said, but his voice was gentle. "Now get some sleep, Miss Mitchell. Tomorrow we can assess how long we will need to stay here." Sarah closed her eyes, but sleep was slow to come despite her exhaustion. She found herself hyper-aware of Cole's presence, of his steady breathing, of the occasional sounds he made when he got up to feed the stove. She had never spent the night in such proximity to a man who was not family, and the impropriety of it would have scandalized Boston society. But this was not Boston, and the normal rules did not apply when survival was at stake. When she finally slept, she dreamed of the whiteout, of being lost in endless white, but this time Cole's voice was always there, guiding her home. Sarah woke to gray daylight filtering through the small window of the shack and the continuing howl of wind. The storm had not abated overnight. Cole was already awake, dressed, and tending to the stove. He looked up when he heard her stirring. "Morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" Sarah took stock of herself. Her fingers and toes still ached, but the pain was duller now, more bearable. "Better, I think. Sore and stiff, but better." "That is good. Let me see your hands again." Sarah held out her hands and Cole examined them carefully, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone with such rough, work-worn hands. "The color is better," he pronounced. "I do not think you will lose anything. You were lucky." "Lucky that you found me," Sarah corrected. Cole made coffee and prepared a simple breakfast of fried salt pork and beans. As they ate, Sarah found herself curious about this man who had saved her life. "Have you always been a rancher?" she asked. "Not always. I was born in Texas, worked cattle drives up from there when I was young, saved my money and bought land here about 10 years ago. Started with just a few head of cattle and built it up from there." He paused, seeming to consider his words. "It is not much compared to operations like your uncle's, but it is mine. Earned it with my own sweat and blood." "That must be a good feeling to build something from nothing." "It is," Cole agreed. "Though there are times it is lonely, this is hard country, and it is even harder when you are alone." Something in his voice made Sarah look at him more closely. "You have no family out here?" "No wife, if that is what you're asking. I was engaged once back in Texas. She decided she did not want to live the ranching life after all, married a banker instead." Cole's expression was neutral, but Sarah sensed old pain beneath the words. "That was a long time ago." "I am sorry." "Do not be. She made the right choice for herself. This life is not for everyone." He looked at Sarah thoughtfully. "What about you? A pretty school teacher from Boston must have left behind a whole line of suitors." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. Not exactly. My family fell on hard times after my father's business failed. The men who had been interested in me suddenly found other prospects more appealing. It turns out I was only attractive when I came with a substantial dowry. Then they were fools, Cole said bluntly. A woman with the courage to come west alone is worth more than any dowry. Their eyes met across the small space, and Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a flutter of feeling she had not expected. She looked away first, suddenly flustered. The day passed slowly. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Cole explained that this kind of blizzard could last anywhere from 1 to 3 days. They were trapped in the small shack together, two strangers forced into intimate proximity by circumstances beyond their control. But as the hours wore on, Sarah found that she did not mind. Cole was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor and a wealth of stories from his years working cattle and building his ranch. He told her about the harsh winter of 1880 when he had lost half his herd, about the time he had tracked a mountain lion that had been killing his calves, about the summer day when he had found a vein of quartz on his property that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. In turn, Sarah told him about Boston, about teaching children to read and write, about the theater and concerts and society parties that now seemed like they belonged to a different world entirely. She told him about her decision to come west, about her determination to make a new life for herself rather than accept a marriage of convenience to a widower twice her age, which had been her mother's solution to their financial problems. "You are brave," Cole said when she finished. "It takes courage to walk away from everything you know." "Or foolishness," Sarah replied. "I nearly died in a blizzard on my first week in Montana. Perhaps I should have married the widower after all." "Do you really believe that?" Sarah thought about it, about the suffocating feeling she had experienced in Boston, the sense that her life was narrowing to a small, predetermined path. Then she thought about the vast Montana sky she had glimpsed before the storm hit, about the freedom she had felt even in those brief moments before the blizzard struck. "No," she said finally, "I do not regret coming here. Even almost dying seems preferable to the slow death of living a life I did not choose." Cole nodded as though she had confirmed something he had suspected. "You will do well out here, Miss Mitchell. This country respects people who make their own choices." That evening, as they sat by the stove and listened to the wind, Cole began to teach Sarah about reading the land and weather. He explained how to tell direction by the stars, by the way moss grows on trees, by the patterns of wind and water. He described the signs that predicted storms, the behavior of animals before bad weather, the subtle changes in air pressure and temperature that could spell the difference between life and death on the prairie. Sarah listened intently, absorbing every word. She had always been a good student, and she recognized that Cole was offering her invaluable knowledge, the kind that could not be learned from books. "Why are you telling me all this?" she asked. "Because you need to know it," Cole replied simply. "You are living in Montana now. This is survival knowledge. Besides," he added with a small smile, "you strike me as someone who likes to learn." "I do," Sarah admitted. "Back in Boston, I used to drive my parents to distraction with all my questions. My mother said it was unbecoming for a lady to be so curious about the world." "Out here, curiosity keeps you alive," Cole said. "Never stop asking questions, Miss Mitchell." That night, Sarah lay awake on the cot again, but this time not from fear or discomfort. She was thinking about Cole, about the unexpected connection she felt with this rough-spoken cowboy who had saved her life. She barely knew him, had spent less than 48 hours in his company, yet she felt more understood by him than by men she had known for years back in Boston. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. She was going to work for her uncle, to build a new life teaching his children. She could not afford to develop romantic feelings for the first man who showed her kindness in Montana, yet she could not deny what she felt, the way her heart beat faster when Cole looked at her, the way she found excuses to sit closer to him by the stove. The storm finally began to break late the next morning. The wind died down to a manageable level, and through the small window Sarah could see patches of blue sky appearing between the clouds. Cole checked the conditions several times before pronouncing it safe to travel. "We will need to move soon," he said. "The temperature is going to drop tonight, and I want to get you to your uncle's ranch before dark." Sarah felt a strange pang of disappointment. She knew they could not stay in the shack forever, that the world was waiting beyond the door, but part of her wanted to preserve this small bubble of time they had created together. Cole had spare men's clothes that Sarah could wear for the journey, as her dress was still damp and completely impractical for riding. She changed into canvas trousers, a wool shirt, and a heavy coat, all far too large but serviceable. Cole showed her how to tuck the trousers into boots and cinch a belt to keep everything in place. "You look like a hand from one of the ranches," he said with amusement. "Your uncle might not even recognize you." Cole's horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Chance, had weathered the storm in a small lean-to behind the shack. Cole saddled him up, then helped Sarah mount before swinging up behind her. It was necessary for them to ride double, given that Sarah had no horse, but it meant sitting pressed against Cole's chest, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. Sarah tried to ignore how right it felt to be held by him, to feel his solid presence at her back as they set out across the snow-covered landscape. The world had been transformed by the blizzard, everything buried under deep drifts of pristine white. The sun glittered off the snow, almost painful to look at, and the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Cole guided Chance with the same confidence he had shown in the storm, reading the land beneath the snow, avoiding drifts that might hide treacherous ground. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of snow under the horses' hooves and the jingle of the bridle. "There," Cole said eventually, pointing to smoke rising in the distance. "That is your uncle's ranch. We will be there within the hour." Sarah felt her throat tighten. Soon this strange, intense interlude would be over. She would return to being Miss Mitchell, the schoolteacher, and Cole would go back to his ranch, and they would likely rarely see each other. The thought was almost unbearable. "Cole," she said softly, and felt him lean slightly closer to hear her. "I do not know how to thank you properly for what you did. You saved my life." "You do not need to thank me," Cole replied, his voice close to her ear. "Any decent man would have done the same." "But you're not just any man," Sarah said, and then bit her lip, afraid she had said too much. She felt Cole's arms tighten slightly around her, pulling her fractionally closer. "Sarah," he said, using her first name for the first time, and her name sounded different in his rough, honest voice. "These past 2 days trapped in that shack with you have been the best days I have had in longer than I can remember. I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other, but I need to say this before we get to your uncle's ranch and reality sets in." "Say what?" Sarah whispered, her heart pounding. "That I would like to see you again, properly, to court you if you will allow it. I know I'm just a rancher with dirt under my fingernails and no fancy education, and you are a refined lady from Boston, but—" "Yes," Sarah interrupted, turning in the saddle as much as she could to look at him. "Yes, I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Cole's face was like sunrise, transforming his weathered features and making him almost boyishly handsome. "You would?" "I would. Cole, these past 2 days, I have felt more myself, more alive than I have in my entire life. Back in Boston, I always felt like I was playing a role, being who everyone else expected me to be. With you, I can just be Sarah. I can ask questions and learn things and not worry about being proper all the time. Do you know how rare that is?" "I can only imagine," Cole said softly. "The thing is, Sarah, I felt the same way. I am not good with fancy words, but when I look at you, I see someone who matches this country. Someone brave and strong and not afraid to be who they really are. That is rarer than you might think." They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, but everything had changed. They were no longer strangers thrown together by circumstance, but two people who had acknowledged a connection that felt bigger than both of them. The Mitchell Ranch came into view, a sprawling operation with a large main house, several barns, and numerous outbuildings. As they rode into the yard, the front door of the house burst open and a large man came running out, followed by a woman and several children. "Sarah," her Uncle Thomas bellowed, "thank God! We thought you were dead when the stage did not arrive." Cole helped Sarah down from the horse, and she was immediately engulfed in her uncle's embrace. He was a bear of a man with a gray beard and kind eyes that were currently wet with tears. "I am safe, Uncle Thomas," Sarah assured him. "Thanks to Mr. Brennan. He found me in the storm and sheltered me in his line shack until it passed." Thomas turned to Cole, gripping his hand hard. "I owe you a debt I can never repay, Brennan. You saved my niece's life." "She is a survivor, sir," Cole replied. "She just needed a little help finding her way." Sarah was ushered into the house by her Aunt Margaret, who fussed over her and insisted she needed a hot bath, a proper meal, and about a week of rest. The next few hours passed in a blur of explanations, hot water, and borrowed women's clothing. By the time Sarah emerged from the guest room in a proper dress again, she felt almost like a stranger to herself after wearing men's clothes for the past few days. She found Cole in the parlor, drinking coffee with her uncle. Both men stood when she entered, and she saw Cole's eyes widen slightly at the sight of her in the green wool dress. "Much better than my old shirts," he said with a smile. "I am not sure about that," Sarah replied. "Your shirts were quite comfortable." Thomas looked between them with a speculative expression but said nothing. Instead, he invited Cole to stay for dinner, an invitation Cole accepted after only a moment's hesitation. The meal was a lively affair, with Sarah's 3 young cousins peppering her with questions about the stagecoach crash and the blizzard. She told them an edited version of events, leaving out how close she had come to dying. Cole was quiet but watchful, and several times Sarah caught him looking at her with an expression that made her stomach flutter. After dinner, Cole prepared to leave, and Sarah walked him out to where Chance was tied. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. "When can I see you again?" Cole asked quietly, mindful of the family inside who might be watching from the windows. "I start teaching next week," Sarah said, "but I will have Sundays free. Then I will come calling this Sunday, if that is acceptable to you and your uncle." "It is more than acceptable," Sarah assured him. She hesitated, then reached out and touched his hand. "Cole, thank you again for everything." Cole turned his hand to clasp hers. "Follow my voice and trust me. You said you would. You kept that promise in the storm. I hope you will keep trusting me as we figure out what this is between us." "I will," Sarah promised. Cole mounted Chance and rode away into the gathering darkness, and Sarah watched until he disappeared from sight. When she turned back to the house, she found her uncle standing on the porch, watching her with an amused smile. "That is a good man," Thomas said. "Honest, hard-working, decent. Built his ranch from nothing. Never asked for help or handouts. If you're thinking what I suspect you are thinking, you could do a lot worse." "Uncle Thomas," Sarah protested, feeling her face heat. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes you know faster than other times," Thomas replied with a shrug. "Your aunt and I knew within a week of meeting that we would marry. Sometimes it is just that clear." That night, lying in a proper bed in her uncle's house, Sarah thought about Thomas's words. She had known Cole for 3 days, most of them spent trapped in a tiny shack during a blizzard. By all reasonable standards, it was far too soon to be feeling what she was feeling. Yet she could not deny the truth in her heart. She had trusted Cole with her life in the storm, following his voice through the blinding white when she could not see her own hand in front of her face. Now she was trusting him with something even more precious, her heart, her hope for the future. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that Sarah grew to love. She spent her weekdays teaching her young cousins, and she discovered that she enjoyed the work even more than she had enjoyed teaching in Boston. Here, education felt urgent and practical, teaching children the skills they would need to thrive in this demanding country. But it was Sundays that she lived for. Every Sunday, Cole would ride over from his ranch, arriving in the early afternoon and staying until evening. Sometimes they would walk around the property, bundled up against the cold. Other times they would sit in the parlor with Sarah's aunt as chaperone, though Margaret was usually so busy with her own children that she provided only the barest semblance of supervision. Cole and Sarah talked about everything. He told her more about his dreams for his ranch, about wanting to improve his breeding stock, about the house he was slowly building to replace the small cabin he currently lived in. Sarah shared her own dreams about possibly starting a proper school in the area, about writing down the stories and knowledge of this place. In March, as the worst of the winter began to release its grip, Cole took Sarah to see his ranch. They rode out on a clear, cold morning, the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at, and Sarah got her first view of the property Cole had built from nothing. The ranch house was indeed small, just a 2-room cabin, but it was well built and sturdy. The barn and corrals showed the same attention to quality. Cole introduced Sarah to his cattle, pointing out the different animals with the pride of a father showing off his children. "This is not much yet," he said, as they stood on a small rise overlooking the property. "But I have plans. I want to expand the herd, build a proper house, maybe hire a few hands to help with the work. I want to build something that will last." "It is already something," Sarah said softly. "You should be proud of what you have accomplished." Cole turned to look at her, his gray-blue eyes serious. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." Sarah's heart began to pound. "What is it?" "Could you be happy here? Not as a visitor, but as someone who lives this life? It is hard work, Sarah. Some days there is no water because the pump is frozen. Some days you are so tired you can barely stand. But the animals still need tending. It is not Boston. It is not fancy or comfortable or easy." Sarah looked out across the snow-covered land, at the endless sky and the distant mountains. She thought about the Whiteout, about how she had been lost and terrified, and how Cole's voice had been her anchor in the storm. She thought about the past months, about how alive she had felt, how purposeful. "Cole," she said, turning to face him fully, "I was never truly happy in Boston. I was comfortable, I was safe, but I was not happy. Out here, even nearly dying in a blizzard, I have felt more alive than ever before. This place challenges me, demands things from me, but it also gives me freedom I never had before, so yes, I could be happy here. I think I already am." "Even if it means marrying a cowboy with dirt under his fingernails?" Cole asked, and there was vulnerability in his voice that she had never heard before. "Especially if it means that," Sarah replied, her voice steady and sure. "Are you asking me to marry you, Cole Brennan?" "I am," Cole said simply. "I love you, Sarah. I think I started falling for you that first day when you grabbed onto my coat and said you trusted me. I have never met anyone like you, anyone brave enough and strong enough to be my partner in this life. So yes, I am asking. Will you marry me?" Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Cole let out a whoop of joy that startled his cattle and pulled Sarah into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. When he set her down, he kissed her for the first time, and Sarah felt like she was flying. They were married in April, when the first green shoots were pushing up through the thawing ground. It was a small ceremony in the church in Great Falls, with Sarah's uncle giving her away and Margaret crying happily throughout the entire service. Several of Cole's rancher friends attended, along with families from the surrounding area who knew and respected Cole. Sarah wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that Margaret had helped her sew, and Cole wore his best suit, though he looked slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothing. But when he saw Sarah walking down the aisle toward him, his face lit up with such joy that Sarah felt her own happiness overflow. "Follow my voice and trust me," Cole whispered, as she took his hand at the altar, echoing the words he had said during the blizzard. "Always," Sarah whispered back. Their first year of marriage was everything Cole had warned her about, hard and demanding, but also filled with joy. Sarah learned to cook on a wood stove, to tend chickens, to help with the cattle when extra hands were needed. She kept teaching her cousins 3 days a week, riding over to her uncle's ranch and back, and she began making plans for a school building that could serve all the children in the area. Cole proved to be everything Sarah had believed him to be: steady and kind, hard-working and honest. He never made her feel less than his equal, always asking her opinion on ranch decisions, always supporting her own projects and dreams. They worked side by side, building their life together with the same determination Cole had shown in building his ranch. Their first child, a son they named James Thomas after both their fathers, was born in February of 1884 during another Montana blizzard. The midwife from Great Falls could not make it through the storm, so Margaret came instead, bringing her experience from birthing her own 4 children. Cole stayed by Sarah's side through the long labor, holding her hand and telling her she was strong. She could do this, just like he had encouraged her through the whiteout. When James finally arrived, red-faced and howling, Cole had tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "He is perfect," he said in wonder. "Sarah, you are amazing." 2 years later, they had a daughter named Rose Margaret, who came easier than James and immediately showed signs of having her father's determination and her mother's curiosity. The ranch continued to grow, and by 1887, Cole was able to finish the house he had been planning, a proper ranch house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor with big windows that looked out over the land. The school Sarah had dreamed of became reality in 1888, a simple but sturdy building funded by contributions from all the ranchers in the area. Sarah taught there 3 days a week, with older students helping to mind James and Rose while she worked. The school became a gathering place for the community, hosting dances and meetings and celebrations. On a clear December evening in 1889, 7 years after the blizzard that had brought them together, Sarah and Cole stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. James, now 5, was showing Rose how to make snow angels, and their laughter carried on the cold air. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked, sliding his arm around Sarah's waist. "Giving up Boston for this?" Sarah leaned into him, fitting against his side as naturally as breathing. "Not once," she said honestly. "That day in the whiteout, when I thought I was going to die, I remember thinking how sad it was that I would never have really lived. But then you found me and you told me to follow your voice and trust you, and I did. That choice led me here, to this life, to you, to our children. How could I possibly regret any of that?" Cole pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I used to think I knew exactly what my life would look like. A decent ranch, enough cattle to make a living, maybe a wife someday if I got lucky, but what we have built together is so much more than I ever imagined. You made me believe in bigger dreams, Sarah." "We made each other believe," Sarah corrected. "You taught me that I was strong enough for this life, and I taught you that you deserved more than just surviving. We are a good team." "The best," Cole agreed. James came running up to the porch, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "Papa, can you tell us the story about the blizzard, about how you saved Mama?" It had become their children's favorite tale, the romantic story of how their parents had met. Cole looked at Sarah, his eyes warm with memory and love. "Your mama did not need saving," he told James, though this was a new variation on the story. "She just needed someone to help her find her way. And once she found it, there was no stopping her." Sarah smiled, remembering the terrified woman she had been in that whiteout, lost and alone and certain she was going to die. That woman had been transformed by the challenge of surviving, by Cole's faith in her, by the demands and rewards of this wild, beautiful country. She had followed Cole's voice through the storm, trusting him when she could not even see her own hand in front of her face. That trust had been the foundation on which they had built everything: a marriage, a family, a life that mattered. The Montana sky was turning pink and gold as the sun set behind the mountains. Inside, the house they had built together waited, warm and welcoming. Their children's laughter rang out across the snow-covered land, and standing there with Cole's arm around her, Sarah Mitchell Brennan felt the deep contentment of someone who had found exactly where they belonged. She had come west looking for a new life and had found so much more. She had found purpose, community, and most importantly, she had found love with a cowboy who had pulled her from the storm and then stayed by her side through all the storms that followed. As they called the children inside for supper, Sarah looked back one more time at the vast Montana landscape. Somewhere out there was the small line shack where she and Cole had waited out the blizzard, where they had first really talked, where the seeds of their love had been planted. It was still there. Cole kept it maintained as part of his regular writing, but it was also forever preserved in Sarah's memory as the place where her real life had begun. The whiteout had made her lose all direction and hope, but Cole had said, "Follow my voice and trust me," and she had. Following that voice had led her home.